How dare you stand there and defy me? You are nothing but a servant in my house.
Darling, please, this isn't the time.
These letters prove everything. You lied to everyone for 15 years. She's lying, Robert. You must believe me.
My God, it's true then.
Your mother kept every single one. She wanted you to know how much she cared.
Servants don't sit at this table. The words sliced through the Whitmore mansion like cold steel, sharp enough to silence every voice beneath the crystal chandeliers. Naomi Carter froze halfway into her chair, her fingers still lightly resting near Lucas Whitmore's trembling hand. Across the 40-foot dining room table, silver forks hovered in the air, untouched beside plates that cost more than Naomi made in a month. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows overlooking the estate gardens, but inside the mansion, the silence felt heavier than thunder. Lucas's breathing came in short, panicked bursts beside her, his small shoulders shaking beneath his navy sweater. "Please don't leave," he whispered, barely audible. Naomi's heart tightened. She had only sat down because the boy had begged her to. The 12-year-old heir to the Whitmore fortune looked moments away from collapsing into another panic attack, and every therapist in the mansion had already failed him. Naomi had seen that look before. Years ago, her younger brother used to shake the same way whenever fear cornered him too hard. So she ignored the rules. Just for a second. Just long enough to calm the child. But Victoria Whitmore had walked into the dining hall at exactly the wrong moment. Her diamond bracelet glimmered beneath the chandelier as she crossed the marble floor in sharp heels, her expression twisting with disbelief. Then came the crack of her hand striking Naomi's cheek. Not hard enough to injure, but loud enough to stop the room cold. A wine glass tipped over beside one of the guests, dark red liquid bleeding slowly across the white tablecloth. Lucas flinched violently. Naomi's face burned, but she didn't move, didn't yell, didn't cry. She simply looked down at the polished oak floor beneath her shoes, while Victoria's voice echoed through the mansion. "You people always forget your place the second someone shows you kindness." Several guests exchanged awkward glances, but said nothing. No one challenged her. No one defended Naomi either. At the far end of the table, Edward Whitmore remained seated in silence, one hand resting near a half-empty glass of bourbon. His gray eyes stayed, fixed on Naomi, unreadable beneath the warm amber light. The billionaire's tailored black suit looked untouched by emotion, untouched by humanity itself. He watched his sister humiliate the woman who had just comforted his son, and still he said nothing. Naomi swallowed carefully, forcing herself to breathe through the sting in her face. The smell of rosemary, butter, and expensive wine suddenly made her stomach turn. Lucas reached for her sleeve under the table, terrified she would disappear. "I'm sorry," Naomi whispered softly to him, not to anyone else. Then she stood. The chair legs scraped quietly against the hardwood floor. Every eye in the room followed her as she stepped away from the table, her maid uniform still damp from the rain outside. Victoria scoffed under her breath and adjusted the cuffs of her white satin blouse, as if cleaning dirt from her skin. Naomi kept walking toward the service hallway without lifting her head. But just before she disappeared through the doorway, her eyes caught something strange. Hanging above the grand staircase was an old oil portrait half hidden in shadow. The woman in the painting looked almost exactly like her mother. Naomi could still feel the heat burning across her cheek long after the dining hall disappeared behind her. The service corridor stretched ahead in cold silence, lined with polished silver carts and walls so spotless they reflected the dim yellow lights above like blurred mirrors. Somewhere deeper inside the mansion, a grandfather clock chimed 9 slow times. She kept walking. Her shoes clicked softly against the marble floor, while rainwater dripped from the hem of her black uniform onto the stone beneath her feet. Most of the staff avoided looking at her as she passed. A few lowered their eyes in quiet sympathy. Others pretended not to notice at all. That was how Whitmore Mansion worked. Silence survived longer there than honesty ever did. Naomi reached the laundry room near the back wing and finally stopped beside a metal sink. Her breathing shook slightly now that no one was watching. She turned the cold faucet handle, and splashed water carefully against her face. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed faintly, making the room feel smaller than it was. She stared down at the sink, trying to steady herself, but the image from upstairs would not leave her mind. That portrait. The woman in the painting had her mother's eyes. Same soft brown skin. Same calm expression. Even the small gold necklace resting near the woman's collarbone looked familiar. Naomi dried her hands slowly and tried convincing herself she was imagining things. Rich families liked old paintings. That was all. But deep down, something uncomfortable had already begun to move inside her chest. I told you not to sit with them. The voice came quietly from behind her. Naomi turned and saw Mrs. Alvarez standing near the doorway, holding a basket of folded towels against her hip. The older housekeeper looked exhausted beneath the harsh lights, but her eyes carried warmth the mansion itself seemed incapable of producing. Naomi lowered her gaze. Lucas was scared, she said softly. He could barely breathe. Mrs. Alvarez sighed and set the towels down on a nearby cart. That boy has not smiled properly in almost 2 years. Naomi leaned lightly against the sink. What happened to his mother? The older woman hesitated too long before answering. People here do not ask questions about the West Wing. Another silence settled between them. Somewhere upstairs, thunder rolled low behind the walls of rain. Naomi rubbed her hands together, trying to warm them. Why does everyone act afraid in this house? Mrs. Alvarez gave a tired smile that never reached her eyes. Because rich people know how to bury things better than poor people do. Before Naomi could respond, quick footsteps echoed through the corridor. Lucas appeared around the corner in blue pajamas, breathing hard like he had run the entire length of the mansion. His blonde hair was messy, and his small hands shook as he looked around the laundry room until he found her. "You left," he whispered. Naomi's expression softened instantly. "I had to." The boy stepped closer, eyes glossy with panic. "Aunt Victoria says you are getting fired." Naomi crouched carefully to his level despite the ache in her knees. "You should be upstairs sleeping." "I cannot sleep in this house," Lucas admitted quietly. The sentence hung in the air heavier than either of them expected. Naomi noticed then that he was clutching something tightly against his chest. An old silver key attached to a faded leather string. The moment she saw the carved symbol on it, her stomach tightened. It was the exact same symbol hidden on the necklace from the portrait upstairs. Lucas slowly opened his trembling hand and placed the key into hers. "My mom told me to give this to the woman in the painting if she ever came back." Naomi stared at the silver key resting in her palm while rain rattled softly against the basement windows behind them. The metal felt strangely warm despite the cold air wrapping around the laundry room. Lucas stood inches away from her now, his blue eyes fixed on the key like he had been carrying its weight for years. Mrs. Alvarez looked pale the moment she noticed the carved symbol engraved near the top. Her folded towels slipped slightly against her arm. "Lucas," she whispered carefully, "where did you get that?" The boy swallowed hard. "From my mom." Naomi lifted her eyes slowly. "Your mother gave this to you?" Lucas nodded once. "Before she died." The room went quiet again. Even the buzzing fluorescent light overhead seemed to fade beneath the weight of the sentence. Naomi glanced back down at the symbol carved into the silver. A small willow tree inside a circle. She knew that symbol. Years ago, her mother used to sketch it absent-mindedly on grocery lists, receipts, even old newspapers spread across their tiny kitchen table in Savannah. Naomi had asked about it once when she was 9 years old. Her mother only smiled sadly and said, "Some doors are meant to stay closed until the right person finds the key." At the time, it sounded like one of her mother's strange little sayings. But standing inside Whitmore Mansion now, with rain washing against the old stone walls and the billionaire's son staring at her like he already knew something she did not, the memory no longer felt harmless. Mrs. Alvarez set the towels down completely this time. Her voice dropped low. "Lucas, your father cannot know you brought that. Downstairs." "Why?" Lucas asked. "Because this house changes when people ask the wrong questions." Naomi looked toward the hallway instinctively. The mansion above them groaned faintly as thunder rolled across the estate grounds. She had only worked there 3 weeks, but already she understood what the older staff meant whenever they whispered about the West Wing. Doors stayed locked there. Security cameras faced inward instead of outward. Certain hallways remained dark even during dinner parties filled with senators, investors, and people worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The mansion did not feel lived in. It felt guarded. Lucas stepped closer to Naomi and lowered his voice. My mom used to go into the West Wing at night when she thought nobody saw her. Naomi frowned slightly. What was she doing there? Crying. The answer came so quietly, it almost disappeared beneath the rain. Mrs. Alvarez crossed herself under her breath. Enough, she muttered. This family buried that pain years ago. Lucas shook his head immediately. No, they did not. For the first time since Naomi met him, anger flashed behind the boy's frightened expression. Dad acts like Mom died in the fire, but she did not. Naomi felt her heartbeat slow. What do you mean? Lucas hesitated. His fingers tightened around the sleeve of his sweater. The night before she disappeared, I heard Aunt Victoria yelling at her upstairs. His voice trembled now. Mom kept saying someone innocent got blamed for what happened in the mansion. Naomi exchanged a quick glance with Mrs. Alvarez, but the older woman looked away too fast. That told Naomi everything she needed to know. They were hiding something. Suddenly, footsteps echoed somewhere above them. Heavy, slow, deliberate. Mrs. Alvarez's face drained of color. Go, she whispered urgently to Lucas. Now. The boy grabbed Naomi's wrist before leaving. Do not give the key to my father, he said quietly. If he finds out you have it, they will make you disappear from this house too. Then he ran into the corridor just seconds before Edward Whitmore appeared in the doorway, his dark overcoat still damp from the storm outside, his cold gray eyes lowering immediately to the silver key resting in Naomi's hand. Edward Whitmore's eyes settled on the silver key with a stillness that made the entire laundry room feel suddenly smaller. Rainwater darkened the shoulders of his charcoal overcoat, and the faint smell of cedar smoke followed him in from the hall. For a long second, nobody moved. Naomi instinctively closed her fingers around the key, but she could already tell from the sharp shift in his expression that he recognized it immediately. Not surprise. Fear. Real fear. Mrs. Alvarez lowered her head toward the floor so quickly it almost looked rehearsed. Sir, she murmured softly. Edward ignored her completely. His attention never left Naomi's hand. Where did you get that? His voice stayed calm, but something beneath it felt dangerously controlled, like pressure building beneath ice. Naomi straightened slowly beside the metal sink. Lucas gave it to me. At the mention of his son's name, Edward's jaw tightened almost invisibly. Thunder rolled low across the estate again, rattling the old pipes inside the walls. The billionaire stepped farther into the room, polished shoes silent against the tile floor. Give it to me. Naomi hesitated. Every instinct told her not to. Lucas's warning still echoed inside her head. If he finds out you have it, they will make you disappear from this house too. Edward noticed the hesitation instantly. His gray eyes darkened. That key does not belong to you. Naomi swallowed carefully. Maybe not, she answered quietly. But it belonged to someone who knew my mother. Silence crashed into the room harder than the storm outside. Mrs. Alvarez closed her eyes briefly like she had just heard a prayer spoken aloud after years of secrecy. Edward's expression shifted for the first time since Naomi met him. Not anger. Not arrogance. Recognition. Naomi saw it happen in real time. The tiny flicker behind his eyes when the past forced its way back into the room, whether he wanted it or not. What was your mother's name? He asked. Naomi's fingers tightened around the silver key. Evelyn Carter. The color drained slowly from Edward Whitmore's face. It happened so subtly another person might have missed it, but Naomi did not. He looked suddenly older beneath the fluorescent light. Older and tired. Upstairs, somewhere beyond the thick stone ceilings, the mansion groaned softly as wind pushed rain against the windows. Edward looked away first. That is impossible, he muttered almost to himself. Naomi frowned. Why? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward the small basement window near the sink and stared out into the storm-covered gardens. The dim light from outside reflected faintly against the glass, outlining the hard shape of his shoulders. Evelyn Carter disappeared 15 years ago, he said finally. The same night my wife died. Naomi felt cold move slowly through her chest. My mother did not disappear. Edward turned sharply toward her. What? She died 6 years ago in Savannah. Naomi's voice softened now, carried more by memory than anger. Cancer. The billionaire stared at her in complete silence. Mrs. Alvarez looked stunned. Naomi continued carefully. Before she died, she used to wake up screaming some nights. She never explained why, but every time it happened, she would lock herself in the bathroom and cry until morning. Edward's breathing slowed almost imperceptibly. Naomi stepped closer now, the silver key glinting faintly beneath the overhead light. Tell me what happened in this mansion 15 years ago. Before Edward could answer, a sharp voice suddenly cut through the hallway behind him. I knew it. Victoria Whitmore stood at the doorway wrapped in a cream-colored cashmere coat, her pale face rigid with fury the moment she saw the key in Naomi's hand. You should have fired her the second she walked through those doors. Victoria Whitmore stepped fully into the laundry room like a storm dragging cold air behind it. Her cream-colored coat hung perfectly over her shoulders, untouched by the rain outside, and the sharp scent of expensive perfume spread through the cramped basement space almost instantly. But it was her eyes that changed everything. The moment she saw the silver key in Naomi's hand, genuine panic flashed across her face before she buried it beneath anger. Edward, she snapped. Tell her to hand that over immediately. Naomi looked between the two siblings carefully. For the first time since arriving at Whitmore Mansion, she realized something important. Victoria was not afraid of her. She was afraid of the truth. Edward remained near the window, silent and rigid beneath the dim fluorescent light. Rain streaked slowly down the glass behind him while thunder rolled across the hills surrounding the estate. Naomi noticed his hand tightening near his coat sleeve like he was fighting memories he could no longer control. Why does this key scare you people so much? She asked quietly. Victoria let out a cold laugh. You walk into this house pretending to clean floors, but now suddenly you think you deserve answers. Naomi did not respond to the insult. Her calmness only seemed to irritate Victoria more. Your mother made the same mistake, Victoria continued sharply. She forgot who she was. Edward's head turned instantly. Victoria. His warning came low and dangerous, but his sister ignored him completely. She stepped closer to Naomi, heels striking the tile floor with slow, deliberate clicks. Evelyn Carter was hired to serve this family, Victoria said. Nothing more. Naomi lifted her chin slightly. Then why is her picture hanging upstairs in your mansion? The question hit harder than shouting ever could. Victoria froze for half a second, long enough for Naomi to know she had struck something real. Mrs. Alvarez quietly backed toward the doorway like she wanted no part of what was happening anymore. Upstairs, the mansion lights flickered once as lightning flashed beyond the rain-covered windows. Edward finally moved away from the glass. That portrait should have been removed years ago, he muttered. Naomi frowned. Why? Another silence. Heavy. Suffocating. Victoria crossed her arms tightly. Because some people should stay buried in the past. Naomi stared at her. My mother saved someone in this house, did she not? Victoria's face hardened instantly. You do not know what you are talking about. Then explain it. Naomi's voice remained soft, but now there was steel underneath it. Explain why Lucas believes his mother did not die, the way everyone says she did. Explain why my mother spent the rest of her life terrified after leaving this place. The room seemed to shrink around them. Edward closed his eyes briefly, exhaustion finally cracking through his cold exterior. That night was an accident, he said quietly. Victoria whipped toward him immediately. Edward. Enough. His voice cut through the room, sharper than thunder. Naomi saw something change in him then. The billionaire who had sat silently at the dinner table while she was humiliated was beginning to fracture beneath the weight of 15 years. He looked at Naomi differently now. Not as staff, not as a problem, as a ghost returned to collect answers. There was a fire in the West Wing, Edward said slowly. My wife Caroline was trapped upstairs. Naomi's pulse quickened. And my mother? Edward swallowed once before answering. Your mother went back inside to save her. The fluorescent light buzzed faintly overhead. Rain hammered harder against the basement windows now, loud enough to almost drown out the silence that followed. Naomi felt her throat tighten. But Caroline died. Edward nodded slowly. That is what the world was told. Victoria suddenly stepped forward, her composure cracking for the first time all night. You cannot tell her the rest. Edward turned toward his sister with hollow eyes. She already has the key. At that exact moment, somewhere deep inside the mansion above them, a heavy door slammed shut on its own. The entire mansion seemed to hold its breath after the door slammed upstairs. Even the rain outside softened for a moment. leaving only the faint ticking of old pipes inside the basement walls. Naomi stood perfectly still with the silver key pressed tightly in her palm, while Edward Whitmore stared toward the ceiling like he already knew which door had opened. Victoria looked different now. Not elegant. Not powerful. Cornered. "This conversation ends here," she snapped suddenly. "That room stays closed." But Edward did not move. His face had gone pale beneath the fluorescent light, and for the first time since Naomi met him, the billionaire looked less like a man in control and more like someone drowning in a memory he had spent years trying to bury. Naomi glanced toward the hallway leading upstairs. "What room?" Victoria stepped forward immediately. "You have no right to ask questions in this house." Naomi's voice remained calm. "Maybe not. But my mother died carrying answers nobody would tell me." The sentence landed harder than shouting. Victoria opened her mouth to respond, but Edward cut her off quietly. "The key opens Caroline's study." Naomi looked back at him. "Your wife's." He nodded once. "Nobody has entered that room since the fire." Thunder rolled low across the estate again, shaking the old foundation beneath their feet. Naomi noticed Mrs. Alvarez standing frozen near the doorway, her hands trembling slightly around the folded towels pressed against her chest. Even she looked afraid of what might happen next. Edward slowly extended his hand toward Naomi. "Give me the key." Naomi studied him carefully. "Why?" He hesitated too long before answering. "Because some truths destroy families." Naomi lowered her eyes briefly toward the silver symbol pressed into her skin. Willow tree inside a circle. Her mother used to draw it everywhere. Grocery lists, birthday cards, old receipts tucked into kitchen drawers. Suddenly she understood why. It was never decoration. It was a warning. "My family was already destroyed," Naomi whispered softly. The words emptied the room of sound. Edward's expression tightened. Victoria crossed her arms harder against herself. "You think finding old secrets will help you?" she asked coldly. "Your mother made choices. Bad ones." Naomi looked directly at her. "Saving someone is a bad choice." Victoria's composure cracked again. She should have minded her place. Edward closed his eyes immediately, as if the sentence physically hurt him. Naomi noticed that too. The shame. The guilt. The silence of a man who had allowed cruelty to survive too long inside his home. Upstairs, another sound echoed faintly through the mansion. A piano note. Soft. Slow. Naomi frowned. "Someone is up there," Mrs. Alvarez whispered under her breath. "No." Victoria's face lost all color. Edward turned sharply toward the stairwell now. "Lucas." They moved quickly through the service hallway together, footsteps echoing across marble floors while the storm battered the windows overhead. Naomi followed them past dark corridors and towering oil portraits until they reached the West Wing staircase. The air changed there. Colder somehow. Dust floated through the dim light pouring from antique wall sconces, and the smell of old smoke still lingered faintly beneath the scent of polished wood. At the top of the stairs, the piano melody continued softly behind a pair of tall white doors. Naomi recognized the song instantly. Her mother used to hum it while cooking Sunday dinners back in Savannah. Edward stopped halfway down the corridor like the sound had stolen the air from his lungs. Victoria whispered sharply, "That is impossible." But Naomi already saw it. The white doors at the end of the hall stood slightly open now, and through the narrow gap between them, warm golden light spilled slowly across the dark hardwood floor for the first time in 15 years. The piano stopped the moment they reached the white doors. Silence rushed back into the hallway, so suddenly Naomi could hear the faint crackling of rain against the tall West Wing windows. Nobody moved. Edward Whitmore stood frozen near the doorway, his face drained of color beneath the dim amber sconces lining the corridor. Victoria remained several steps behind him, breathing unevenly now, one hand gripping the staircase railing hard enough for her knuckles to pale. Naomi slowly stepped closer to the partially opened doors. Dust floated through the warm light spilling from inside the room, turning the air golden and ghost-like. The smell hit her first. Smoke. Old paper. Lavender. It felt strangely familiar, like walking into a memory she had never lived but somehow still recognized. Edward finally spoke, his voice rough and low. "That room has been locked since Caroline died." Naomi looked at the silver key in her hand. Maybe it was waiting. She pushed the doors open wider. The study beyond looked untouched by time itself. A grand piano rested near the windows overlooking the storm-covered gardens. Shelves lined with old books stretched toward the ceiling. A fireplace sat cold beneath an enormous oil painting of Caroline Whitmore, her soft smile frozen forever in layers of paint and shadow. But it was the desk near the far wall that stopped Naomi cold. Framed photographs covered nearly every inch of it. Some showed Caroline holding a baby Lucas beside the gardens. Others captured charity galas and formal dinners. Yet hidden among them were smaller photographs turned slightly away from the room, as though someone had tried to conceal them without fully removing them. Naomi stepped closer carefully. Her breath caught. One of the pictures showed Caroline standing beside a black woman in a yellow dress beneath blooming willow trees. Naomi recognized the woman instantly. Her mother, younger, smiling, alive. Victoria's voice cracked behind her. "Edward, do not let her touch anything." But he did not answer. He looked incapable of speech now. Naomi reached trembling fingers toward the photograph. On the bottom corner, written in faded blue ink, were 4 words. "Sisters are chosen too." Naomi stared at the handwriting. Her mother's handwriting. The same looping letters from birthday cards she kept stored in a box back home. Suddenly the room no longer felt like a stranger's mansion. It felt personal, intimate, haunted. Mrs. Alvarez quietly crossed herself again near the doorway. "Oh God," she whispered. Naomi slowly opened one of the desk drawers. Inside rested dozens of neatly tied letters wrapped with pale ribbon. Edward stepped forward immediately. "Do not." But Naomi had already seen the name written across the top envelope. Evelyn Carter. Her pulse thundered in her ears now. Victoria moved sharply toward the desk. "Those letters are private." Naomi looked directly at her. "My mother wrote these." Victoria's calm finally shattered. "Your mother nearly destroyed this family." Edward closed his eyes painfully. "Victoria, stop." Naomi unfolded the top letter carefully. The paper had yellowed with age, but the ink remained clear beneath the warm desk lamp. Her voice came barely above a whisper as she read aloud. "If anything happens to me, tell Naomi the fire was not an accident." The room fell completely silent. Rain hammered harder against the tall windows now, like the storm itself was trying to get inside. Edward staggered backward one slow step, his hand gripping the edge of the piano for balance. Victoria's face turned pale with panic. Naomi kept reading, her voice shaking now. "Caroline found out what your family was hiding in the West Wing. She said innocent people were being blamed to protect the Whitmore name." Edward looked up sharply. "No." Naomi turned another page. Tears slowly filled her eyes as she reached the final sentence written in her mother's hand. "If Naomi ever returns to this house, tell her Caroline Whitmore never died in that fire." The words hung inside the study like smoke that refused to clear. Nobody breathed. Naomi stood beside the desk with the letter trembling softly between her fingers while rain streaked down the tall West Wing windows behind her. Edward Whitmore looked completely hollow now, one hand still pressed against the piano as though the room itself might collapse beneath him. Victoria's face had gone pale beneath the warm golden light. "That is not true," she whispered sharply, but even she sounded unconvinced. Naomi lowered the letter slowly. "My mother believed Caroline was alive." Edward shook his head immediately, though the movement lacked certainty. "We buried her." Naomi looked directly at him. "Did you ever see the body?" Silence answered for him. The storm outside deepened, thunder rolling low across the hills while old branches scraped softly against the mansion windows. Edward's breathing became uneven. Naomi could see memories forcing their way through him now. Pieces he had spent years locking away inside the West Wing along with everything else. "The fire destroyed most of the room," he muttered quietly. "The police said," he stopped. Naomi noticed it immediately. He did not trust the sentence even as he spoke it. Victoria stepped forward suddenly. "Enough of this." Her voice cracked harder now. "Edward, she is manipulating you exactly like her mother did." Naomi's eyes shifted toward her calmly. "What are you afraid I will find?" Victoria froze. Just for a second. But it was enough. Edward noticed too. Slowly, painfully, he turned toward his sister. What did Caroline discover before the fire? Victoria's composure finally shattered completely. She was going to ruin all of us. The words exploded out before she could stop them. Rain hammered against the glass. Naomi stared at her in stunned silence. Victoria paced across the study now, breathing hard, years of fear and bitterness spilling out all at once. Your wife would not let things go, she snapped toward Edward. She kept digging into father's accounts, the illegal land deals, the payouts. She said innocent families were forced out of their homes so this estate could expand. Naomi felt cold spread through her chest. Savannah, her mother, the symbol. Suddenly, everything connected in ways she never expected. Edward's face twisted with disbelief. Father told me those rumors were lies. Victoria laughed bitterly. Because you wanted to believe him. The room seemed darker now despite the warm lamps glowing around them. Naomi slowly looked around the study again. The hidden photographs. The letters. The untouched piano. This was never just a dead woman's room. It was a prison built for guilt. Caroline threatened to expose everything. Victoria continued quietly now. The night of the fire, she said she was leaving this house forever. Edward stared at her. What happened? Victoria's eyes filled suddenly, but not with softness. With exhaustion. Father locked her in the study while they argued. Naomi's breath caught. Edward stepped away from the piano. No. The fire started downstairs, Victoria whispered. Evelyn ran back inside to save Caroline after the staff escaped. Naomi closed her eyes briefly as her mother's voice echoed through old memories she never understood before. Some doors are meant to stay closed until the right person finds the key. Edward's entire body seemed to collapse inward beneath the truth. You told me Caroline died instantly. Victoria looked away. That is what Father ordered everyone to say. And Caroline? Edward asked quietly. Victoria swallowed hard. When the firefighters reached the study, she was gone. Silence swallowed the room whole. Naomi's pulse thundered in her ears. Edward looked toward the rain-covered windows like the world outside no longer made sense. 15 years believing his wife died in flames while somewhere beyond the walls of the mansion, she may have survived. Then another realization struck him harder. He slowly turned back toward Naomi, his voice barely above a whisper. Your mother knew where Caroline went. The storm finally began to fade just before sunrise. Rainwater slid slowly down the tall west wing windows, while pale morning light crept across Caroline Whitmore's study for the first time in years. Nobody had slept. Naomi sat quietly beside the cold fireplace with her mother's letters spread carefully across her lap, each page carrying pieces of a life she never fully understood until now. Across the room, Edward Whitmore remained near the piano in complete silence, staring at nothing. The billionaire who once controlled boardrooms, politicians, and entire city blocks now looked like a man crushed beneath the weight of his own family's lies. Victoria had not spoken in nearly an hour. She stood near the doorway with empty eyes, her expensive coat hanging loosely around her shoulders as though the night itself had aged her. Naomi unfolded the final letter slowly. The paper trembled faintly between her fingers. If Caroline survives, she read softly. Tell her I kept my promise. Tell her Naomi deserved a life far away from this house. Edward lowered his head immediately. Naomi continued reading through the quiet room. There is enough cruelty here already. The words settled over all of them like ash. Lucas appeared silently in the doorway then, barefoot and exhausted, his blonde hair messy from sleep. He looked at his father first. Is Mom alive? Nobody answered right away. The child's voice had cut deeper than any accusation ever could. Edward finally looked toward his son, but there were tears standing in his gray eyes now. Real tears. I do not know, he admitted quietly. Lucas stepped into the study slowly, his small gaze moving toward Naomi and the letters in her hands. But Miss Naomi knows the truth now, he whispered. Naomi felt her throat tighten. She looked down at the old pages once more. At the faded handwriting of a woman who had carried impossible secrets just to protect her child. Her mother had not abandoned her emotionally. She had been trying to keep her safe from this mansion all along. Outside, dawn light slowly washed across the estate gardens, soft gold replacing the darkness of the storm. For the first time since arriving at Whitmore Mansion, Naomi noticed how beautiful the property actually was beneath all its silence and fear. Edward walked toward her carefully. Gone was the cold distance that once surrounded him like armor. He looked tired now. Human. I failed your mother, he said quietly. Naomi met his eyes without anger. You failed a lot of people. He nodded slowly, accepting the truth without defense. Behind him, Victoria looked away in shame. Edward glanced toward the portrait of Caroline hanging above the fireplace. Everything my family built came from hiding pain instead of facing it. Naomi folded the letters gently. Pain does not disappear just because rich people lock it in another room. The sentence emptied the study of words again. Lucas quietly crossed the room and sat beside Naomi on the rug near the fireplace. Without hesitation, he rested his head lightly against her arm like he trusted her more than anyone else left in the mansion. Edward watched the moment in silence. Then slowly, almost painfully, he pulled a chair away from the desk and placed it beside Naomi near the fire. Not for staff, not out of pity, an invitation. Equal. Human. Naomi looked at the chair for a long moment before finally sitting down beside the boy. No one spoke after that. The mansion itself seemed quieter now, like something old and ugly had finally loosened its grip on the walls. Morning sunlight drifted through the west wing windows, warming the dust floating gently through the air. Above the fireplace, Caroline Whitmore's painted smile remained soft and knowing beneath the golden light, while downstairs, somewhere far beyond the silence, the grand clock of Whitmore Mansion began striking a brand new hour.